The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. It's no secret, certainly not on this show, that many communities in the Bronx are beset with facilities that hold them back rather than help them grow. An obvious example is the ongoing battle those in the Westchester Square section of the Bronx are having with the city over the siting of a homeless shelter. Folks in Wakefield are talking about oversaturation as well. In Morrisania over the summer, there was outrage about a transitional facility across the street from a junior high school. And as you know, because we covered it on the show, just a few months ago, there was significant outrage over a men's shelter in Highbridge. Most recently, though, a judge ruled in favor of Bronx advocates who want greater transparency in the machinations behind the city's 38-unit facility on St. Peter's Avenue. The siting of supportive facilities for the homeless is a complex and important issue, and it's what we're going to tackle tonight. Our phones are open for you to weigh in on the controversy. You can call us at 718-960-7241 or email comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. We have one of the lead advocates with us from the Westchester Square Merchants Association, John Benizio. Good evening.
Good evening, Gary.
For joining us. And an attorney who is representing the group in court, a former elected official and a familiar face to this program, Steve Kaufman. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you for having us, Gary.
On the phone is from the Westchester Square Zariga Improvement Association. It is Sandy Lusk. Sandy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's start with you, Mr. Benizio, as one of the plaintiffs, as Sandy is as well. Why the lawsuit? We'll just give a little bit of background. And what is the issue with this facility on St. Peter's Avenue?
Well, the issue is that they put this facility up. It was supposed to be a apartment building for middle-income people, and literally overnight, without any community notification, without going to the community board, the local councilman, or anything, they just secretly moved 36 families into the building and said it was a homeless shelter. They paid a per diem rate, which was equal to over $3,000 a month for apartments that would normally have gone for $1,500. How'd you like to wake up one morning and your most important asset, which is your home, has suddenly been devalued tremendously by the fact that a homeless facility was put into your neighborhood? You didn't know about it and you never had a chance to speak up about it.
People would say, you know what? What's the matter with Mr. Benizio? Don't you know that we have issues with homeless people? Poverty is running rampant in the Bronx. We have a building here that we can put families in. It's a reasonable place, at least from the perspective of the families, to give them a chance to rehabilitate themselves and their lives. Why can't we put that in your neighborhood? And I'm sorry for you or neighbors who don't like the idea, but what's the matter? You don't have a heart anymore? You lost your sense of charity?
This lawsuit is not about the homeless, and it's not about the not in my backyard syndrome. This lawsuit is about the city's policy, or a lack of a homeless policy, and their policy of going into buildings and neighborhoods and siting facilities without community input, and the fact that they will pay about $4,000 a month for one of those apartments when they can very easily pay somebody's rent for $1,200 a month. And in these fiscal times when the city's always crying that they don't have money for cops, they don't have money for teachers, they don't have money for firemen, this is an outrage. And the Department of Homeless Services does it out the back door. Certain people are getting rich doing this, and it's a big secret. And this lawsuit is about bringing it to light and making it a transparent issue, not just about this homeless shelter, but for all the communities in New York City.
Mr. Kaufman, let's talk from a legal perspective. Do you see this as a landmark case? And I mentioned some of the other neighborhoods in addition to the one that Mr. Benizio is immediately concerned about. Do you see this as a bottom line case, as defining what the process should be, or is it really an isolated situation? Well, let's just get this solved and then we'll deal with the others.
Well, first I want to thank John Bonizio and Sandy Lusk for their leadership role in trying to bring the city to heel and to listen to the communities. When John came to see me, I don't know if you remembered, I said, you're going to lose the lawsuit. And we now are going through the miraculous seasons of Hanukkah and Christmas, and we have made law in this Bronx County. We overturned prior precedents, Ferrer versus Dinkins, which Ferrer brought the same kind of lawsuit and lost. And now the city's not even permitted to appeal from the decision that came out in our favor. This is a miracle. It's setting law throughout the city and state, and I think we have a good shot at stopping the arbitrariness of the city. The charter says the city has to do a ULURP and has to do a fair impact study. The city didn't do either one in this situation.
The decision that I talked about at the outset, which you have referred to right here, clarified a little bit for viewers who aren't fully familiar with this idea that I talked about and you've alluded to, that is about transparency. What specifically did the judge rule on that really you think is a landmark
The city said that they did not have to conform to the charter rules of a property proceeding and a fair impact statement because they did not rent from the landlord. They went through an intermediary called Basics. The judge said, Jeffrey Wright, in a great decision, that that's nonsense. The city is still supplying the money to Basics, is still paying the rent for the people to live in this shelter, and therefore it's still a city operation. And they must conform to the rules set forth in the charter. They cannot get away with a subterfuge. So that's the ruling that we think was the ruling that overturned Ferrer versus Dinkins, which permitted the subterfuge and intermediary. This judge said no subterfuge, the city's still financing everything, and therefore the city's on the hook. By the way, the controller also challenged the city on procurement practices, that there was no bidding process, they just gave the money to Basics. So you have three violations: procurement, fair impact, and the property procedure laws that they have to obey and go to a community planning board, which they didn't do.
I'm going to ask you in a moment, we want to bring Ms. Lusk into the dialogue. I'm going to ask you in a moment about the next steps for both of you and where we're at as this case goes and maybe some other cases. Ms. Lusk, let's turn to you. Talk to me a little bit about homeless policy and in general. I mean, we've talked very specifically about this particular lawsuit and instance, but is the city handling this notion of homeless shelters well? And irrespective of the lawsuit, is this really a good way to set homeless policy and a good process, at least from the city's perspective, to give people, as I said earlier, a leg up and a chance to move their lives forward?
Well, actually, the Bloomberg administration's homeless housing policies have been a complete disaster. And I have been following along with this on, I go on the Coalition for Homeless. They put out a report every April, and I have been reading these and looking at the research because the Bloomberg administration's two housing subsidy policies, Housing Stability Plus and Work Advantage, have failed. People lost their apartments and were thrown back into shelters in record numbers. I think that I saw the percent was like 157% have gone back into families now have gone back into shelter because they could no longer maintain their apartments. As far as I know now, there is no specific policy to transition people from temporary transitional housing into permanent housing. With the, Section 8 ended December 2009, so that avenue is closed. I know New York Housing Authority buildings are basically closed to the homeless. They're not prioritized on the list to get apartments. And now with Work Advantage, the subsidy gone, there is no plan, to transition the homeless.
Do you think that this singular lawsuit. Now, Mr. Kaufman is talking about how it might be a landmark case for certain procedural reasons. Do you think this will open the door to take a look at some of those issues that you raise, or is that really a separate question and groups like Coalition for the Homeless are going to have to deal with that on their own? Or is it connected to this whole process that we're talking about here in the studio?
There are two halves of the same coin. As the policies literally have created thousands of homeless families over the past 2 years or so, all of a sudden it becomes an emergency situation. How are you going to house them? Where are they going to go? And the reaction has been a panicked reaction of placing homeless shelters just about any place they could and building huge facilities. They're basically a warehousing homeless people.
Sandy, I'm just going to hold you because they were getting some feedback upstairs, and we'll get back to you in a moment. Mr. Benizio, let's ask you a similar question to the one that we just asked Ms. Lusk, and that is the connection between what you're trying to do. I mean, basically, you talked about an individual who wakes up one morning and, gee whiz, now I've got, frankly, an unwanted facility in my neighborhood, but there is a larger question. Is that an important question for you here, or do you see this as, you know what, we're just going to deal with this lawsuit and take care of what we need to take care of in our community?
Well, Gary, somebody has to step up to the plate, and that's why we did this. The city has been doing this in all 5 boroughs for years, and it just came to the point where somebody has to stand up and say, enough is enough. Okay, this policy, this process does not work. And you take a look, there's a consent decree that the city entered into some 25 years ago. And basically what that says is anyone who comes to the shelter system and says, I'm homeless, I need to be sheltered, must be provided services. Now, in this type of economy, you have people coming here from other states because in other states, they don't have such a liberal policy. So you come to New York, you're guaranteed services, you're guaranteed shelter, which is a good thing. It's a great thing. It speaks volumes about what New York City does for the people of this country, this world, this city. But on the other hand, what about the people who live here, who pay taxes here, who have invested in New York City by buying homes, by paying taxes? Why do they not have a say in what's happening with homeless policy?
Well, the person to answer that question is going to be sitting right next to you because he's a former councilman and state official.
Well, I'm glad that John mentioned the consent decrees. We must get into a philosophical question, and this may be difficult to deal with in a half hour. In 1979, Callahan versus Carey, and men have to get homeless shelters, have to be put into homeless shelters. 1981, Eldridge versus Koch, women. 1983, McCain versus Koch, families. The Legal Aid Society tortures the city of New York, I'd like to finish, on these cases that happened 30 years ago, the consent decrees. They're undemocratic because they're ruled by a judge that sits on top of Mount of Olympus and doesn't care about Westchester Square. The city council did something I think foolish the past few weeks because the city wanted to implement the policy where a homeless person would have to prove why they're homeless.
Just going to ask you.
Wait, let me finish. Now, the married couples have to do that. Why shouldn't a homeless man show it? The New York Times said in regard to Westchester Square, the last paragraph in their story, a 21-year-old homeless woman who had a child, was pregnant with another child, says the city owes me shelter. I don't owe her anything, okay? I have 4 children, and I get an ulcer worrying about putting them through college. Why doesn't she worry a little rather than have kids without a father and demand immediate shelter?
In many cases, people have been either thrown out of their homes.
Stop
They've
it.
had...
I'm going to fight with you because I don't want to hear that, okay?
Well, you don't have to want to hear it.
It shouldn't be put under court order for 30 years. It's undemocratic. There's a new mayor. There's a new governor. There are new plaintiffs. And this decree goes marching on. 25% of our budget is spent on consent decrees, where nobody who votes has any say what's being done with our money.
If somebody says that they've been... they for a number of reasons, whether they're a young person and they've been thrown out of their home, or they are the victim of some spousal abuse situation or other circumstance, the city is making them document something that they probably can't document standing there in front of somebody who's evaluating their case. Shouldn't that person be?
Let me ask something. Did the city document the Pennsylvania license plates that went in front of the homeless shelter in Westchester Square, and people from Pennsylvania moved into the homeless shelter? Do you know that the Legal Aid Society is fighting the right of the city to throw out people who are disruptive in homeless shelters, who cannot get along with the other people in the homeless shelters, who have a record of abuse, and the Legal Aid Society says you have to keep them in the homeless shelter? What kind of rules are this? If we did something wrong, we would be thrown out. Nothing is done to these people in the homeless shelters. Yes, we have to help people who are in need, but let's make sure that they're in need.
Okay, let's go to the telephone. I understand, did Father Gorman call in, Jane? Can we get... Yeah, let's get Father Gorman on the phone. Father Gorman, Sandy, we're going to get back to you in a second. We've got a lot of people we're dealing with right now.
That's good.
But Father Gorman, how are you, first of all, sir? Everything all right?
Everything is great, Gary. Up here in
Great. I can barely hear him down here. But tell me a little bit about it. And I alluded to it at the opening. I don't know if you heard it, but I alluded to the situation in Wakefield, which is slightly different, but somewhat similar to what they're going on in Westchester Square. So can you tell us about that?
Well, I think what's happening in Wakefield, Gary, is that the city is creating a homeless colony. The mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, when he was in his second term, prior to breaking his own pledge to run for a third term, turned around and announced with much fanfare, along with his deputy mayor, Linda Gibbs, that they had the solution to homelessness, and that homelessness would virtually disappear as a problem in the city of New York under his administration.
I think just about every mayor and every elected official would say something like that.
Well, I don't think they said it with the same kind of fanfare and with the same kind of definitiveness that we heard from the Bloomberg administration. I think previous administrations may have said that they wanted to, somewhat address the problem and to help to make it better, but taking care of homelessness in toto, that's a whole other question. But the fact of the matter is that, as in so many other things, we've been told that things are going to be better, that they're going to be done the right way, and then we find out that it's the same old nonsense over and over and over again.
Well, so what is going on? You talked about they're creating a homeless colony. Explain to viewers who are not familiar with what you're alluding to. What does that mean, and why would you say something like that?
Okay, within a 5-minute walking distance, the city of New York is going to open up, or allowed to have open up, 3 establishments dealing with homeless folks. One on White Plains Road, and then right down 233rd Street at the corner with Bronx Boulevard, in 2 buildings directly across the street from each other, to establish 2 other facilities, one run by Project Renewal and the other one run by the Doe Fund. Those 2 facilities alone, right across the street from each other, will have nearly 350 homeless folks on one street corner, with another 65 or so right up the block.
Are you satisfied with the process that led to it, or are you in sync with what Mr. Benizio and Mr. Kaufman is saying on our show, that maybe we ought to take a look at the process, and would you support what they're saying in court?
What process is there? I don't, Gary. There's no process.
Answer my question with a question.
I mean, Gary, that's the whole smoke and mirrors game that's been going on with this administration concerning the homeless, as with so many other things as well. They say there's a process. The community board gets a note from somebody. We want to open a homeless shelter. You don't hear back from them. They don't communicate with you. You write letters. You make inquiries.
So your basic
that's supposed to turn around and show the distribution of city municipal facilities and throughout the community boards. They never turn around and tell you. They say, well, we may need something, or nothing is planned at this time.
So you're in a similar situation to what Mr. Benizio and Ms. Lusk are in Westchester Square, saying we've got this facility, but according to you, there was no process. They just simply put it there, and now you're in the process of trying to get it out in some form or deal with it.
Here's the charade, Gary, and this has been going on since the time of Mayor Koch. The city is required by fair share standards in the city charter to equally distribute the pain of municipal facilities that have an impact on the community. For those things to be considered under fair share, you have to consider community boards, you have to bring in borough presidents, and the city doesn't want to go through this.
Right. Father Gorman, thank you for joining us. You can hang on the phone, and we'll get back to you. I want to get to Sandy Lusk, who's also on the phone. Sandy, tell me a little bit, give me a little summary about what you heard in the dialogue between me and Mr. Kaufman about this idea of homeless policy and the city's readiness to provide support and the state laws that require support for just about anybody who says, you know what, I need a place to stay.
Well, I guess the key word there is support. I could understand that if you present yourself as a homeless person. I mean, I personally believe that the city has certain responsibilities, but these policies are extremely irresponsible. They're irresponsible. They're not helping the homeless, and they're not helping the communities in which these huge warehouses, which is really what they are being cited. There is no policy now to transition homeless people from transitional temporary housing to permanent housing.
All right, now let me ask you a question, and Mr. Kaufman is no longer an elected official, so he's not I can't ask him this question. Do you talk to elected officials who have an interest in this kind of policy and can have input into this policy to help make changes to this policy? Because it seems to me we can all talk here on Bronx Talk and we can fight in court, but unless you have elected officials willing to support these agendas, it'll just be talk here on Bronx Talk.
I have spoken to our elected officials. Yes, I have.
And the reaction
I have
is?
written, in my column in the Bronx Times, and I've just basically tried to get this word out as much as I can because the mayor's policies are actively creating.
And I'm waiting to hear
families.
you tell me what the reaction is. What is their reaction?
The reaction
Are they ready to support the effort?
Well, the question is, what
I'm
to
not
do
hearing
about
a big
it.
answer on that.
And basically, Mayor Bloomberg, it's his policies. It's the city, and it's him, and he is apparently very set on these particular policies.
Sandy, hang on. John wanted to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I want to weigh in on that. Thank you, Gary. You know what the problem is with that? You talk to an elected official about this, and they don't want to be seen as being against homelessness. They're afraid of that. So
this was the question that I asked you right at the outset.
They try to skirt the issue. When I spoke to John Liu in a closed-door meeting about this homeless shelter, he said to me, first question out of his mouth, what do you want them to do with these people? Put them back out on the street?
Well, this is what I asked you.
And I told him, I said, Mr. Controller, it's not an issue with that. The issue here and the issue before you as the controller of the city of New York is how was the procurement of this facility enacted, and is it in line with the law? Because your job as controller is to review these things and to tell me, I'm a taxpayer, why are we paying $4,000 a month for an apartment in there? And he joined our lawsuit. Okay.
As a result of that
That's
conversation.
correct.
I'm going to need a quick answer because I want to get to somebody else on the phone. Is the city out of ideas? Because the answer to the question that Mr. Liu asked Mr. Benizio requires creativity, requires thought, requires some manipulation. Do you think, Mr. Kaufman, that the city is out of ideas?
Totally. I think that we have a gigantic problem. We want to help the needy, but we also want to make sure that they're needy. And I don't think the city's able at this point in time to do what's right.
On the telephone, who called in, a viewer, it is Mark from Pelham Parkway. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Gary. Hey, John. Hey, Steve.
Go ahead, Mark. Get right to it.
I'm going to make this very simple. When you talk about consent decrees and you talk about what the city doesn't do or do right or anything, I've got two questions. One question is, how come we're not going after any of these people? It seems like it's criminal to pay $4,000. Somebody's got to have their...
You're talking about the people who are behind the facility.
Yes, with the way the city's been doing the homeless. And the other thing I have, why is everybody surprised? We voted not once but twice for term limits, and we voted for it. And the second time we voted, they even reversed the question, and the mayor reversed it and just said, I'm going to run, only I can save New York, and nobody did anything about it.
Got it.
So my question is, how do we put these criminals in jail?
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to maybe even try to answer. I think you are going after them with this lawsuit. Isn't that the simple
problem
answer
that
to what
you
he's
have
suggesting?
today is that people vote for somebody and they get the same. That's why people don't want to vote anymore. That's answering Mark's question. But it's unfortunate everything has to be fought out in the courts. This should be a legislative and executive responsibility to come up with a solution. I'm not saying it's easy. It's very, very difficult. But you can't ram. The landlords are making policy for homelessness. This guy calls up the DHS, puts his building on the block, and immediately they rent it at twice as much money. You're Joe worker, you're making $30,000, $40,000 a year, paying $1,500 a month in an old rundown building, and the city's paying $3,000 a month for a homeless person in a beautiful building. What is wrong with that picture? Why work?
Only have about a minute. What's next? You're going back into court? We're
going to do discovery. We're going to put their feet to the fire, and we're going to find out how they make policy. And they didn't do this properly, and I'm not saying we're going to close the facility, but we're going to give them agita, and that's what they deserve.
Do you want to respond on what your plan is at the head of
Gary,
the
the plan is we're going to
Association?
follow the money, okay? Because when you get right down to it, the city is paying through the nose, and there are people that are getting rich off the backs of homeless people.
That's right.
And we're being accused of being anti-homeless. We're not the ones being anti-homeless. It's the people who are taking all this money, and the government is allowing it. And we're going to find out where it is. We're going to follow the money, Gary.
Is there a phone number for people who want information, or a way? Or Jane put that up on the screen? Then we'll say thank you to Sandy Lusk, who joined us tonight from the Westchester Zuriga Improvement Association. Thank you to Father Gorman, who called in, who's the chairman of Community Board 12. Thank you to John Benizio for being with us. Thank you to Steve Kaufman for being with us. And folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of the show, including this one, are available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar, and you can see everything we've done. Now, next week, December 26th, he knows about the show because Mr. Benizio will actually be back with us wearing a different hat. He's one of our guests to talk about vision in the Bronx. He's got some new glasses technology he's going to show off. And we'll also have a representative from an organization that provides services to the blind and visually impaired, and she'll help us see what's going on with vision in the Bronx. Then right after New Year's, January 2nd, we take a look at LGBT life in the Bronx with the author of an excellent novel about gays in the Bronx and also the program director of the newly located Bronx Pride Center. Then on January 9th, we focus on the Central Bronx with an advocate who fights for his community, and the chair of Community Board 4 will join us as well. A lot going on. We hope you'll join us. Always something good here on Bronx Talk, Monday nights at 9. Cablevision Channel 67, Verizon Fios 33, that's where you find BronxNet. Special thanks and happy holidays to producer Jane Folloro, director Michael Arias, the cast of thousands who work on the show, and happy holidays to you too.
This is so cool, Dad. Awesome. This is so cool, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.